My name is Mariama Brooks, and at the family dinner, my sister called me the family failure. Her boss just smiled and said, "The backyard in Edmond smelled of barbecue ribs and cheap wine." The scent was cloying, a thick, humid mixture of hickory smoke and the overly sweet floral perfume that my stepmother, Tina, sprayed liberally to mask the scent of charcoal. It was late August in Oklahoma, the kind of heat that doesn't just sit on you, it clings, heavy and suffocating, like a wet wool blanket. Above the manicured lawn, red and gold balloons bobbed lazily in the stagnant air, tethered to the picnic tables like captured thoughts. They were the colors of USC, Dad's alma mater, though the party was technically for his 55th birthday. I stood near the perimeter of the patio, my back pressed against the rough cedar of the privacy fence. From this vantage point, I was less a guest and more an anthropologist, observing a foreign, hostile tribe. I wore a simple black linen dress, breathable and professional, a stark contrast to the pastel explosion that was the Brooks family aesthetic. My arms were crossed, a physical barrier I had erected years ago, guarding a heart that had learned the hard way not to beat too loudly in this house. Everyone wore practiced smiles. They were the kind of smiles you see in toothpaste commercials or political campaign flyers, teeth whitened to an unnatural porcelain shine, eyes crinkling just enough to suggest joy but not enough to cause wrinkles. Everyone, that is, except me. My face was a mask of neutral observation. I watched Skyler, Dad's daughter with Tina, moving through the crowd. She was a vision in peach chiffon, her laughter ringing out like wind chimes in a storm piercing, relentless and demanding attention. Skyler had always been the sun around which the household orbited. At 26, she carried herself with the unearned confidence of someone who has never heard the word no without a credit card attached to it. Today, she was parading a man around the yard, her hand looped through his elbow with a possessiveness that made him look less like a guest and more like a trophy she had won at a county fair. Everyone, listen up!" Skylar's voice cut through the low murmur of conversation and the clinking of ice and sweet tea. She dragged the man toward the main table where Dad sat, holding court with a beer in one hand and a spatula in the other. The man was tall, dressed in a navy blazer that was far too formal for a backyard barbecue, yet he wore it with an ease that suggested he didn't care about the temperature. He had salt and pepper hair and eyes that scanned the environment with a predatory intelligence. This was Beckett Lang. To Skyler, he was the station manager at OKC Channel 9, the man who held the keys to her career. To me, he was something else entirely. Skyler positioned him in front of Dad, beaming. "Daddy, this is Beckett. My boss, the one I told you about who's been mentoring me." Dad, Marcus Brooks, stood up, wiping his hands on an apron that read Times Grill Sergeant **. He extended a hand, his grip firm, the handshake of a man who measured worth in grip strength and tax brackets. "Good to meet you, Beckett. Sky tells me she's practically running the place." Beckett smiled. It was a polite, tight-lipped expression. "She certainly makes her presence known, Mr. Brooks." Skyler preened, tossing her curls back. She turned her gaze toward me, her eyes narrowing slightly. It was a look I knew well, the prelude to a strike. She needed to elevate herself, and in the physics of our family dynamic, the only way for Skyler to rise was for Mariama to fall. "And over there," Skyler announced, pointing a manicured finger in my direction, "is Mariama, my half-sister." The guests turned. My cousins, aunts, uncles, and neighbors, people who had watched me grow up from the sidelines, swiveled their heads. "She's still figuring things out," Skyler continued, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "She dropped out of college, you know, bounces between odd jobs. We love her, but honestly..." She paused for dramatic effect, giggling that shrill, piercing sound that Tina had taught her. "This is the failure of our family." Laughter rippled through the yard. It wasn't a roar, but a polite, cruel chuckle. Tina covered her mouth, her eyes dancing with amusement. Dad let out a deep, rumbling laugh, shaking his head as if acknowledging a tragic but undeniable truth. "Oh, Sky, be nice," Tina said, though her tone suggested Skyler should do no such thing. The air grew still around me. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, not from shame, but from a cold, simmering rage that had been fermenting for 15 years. I held Beckett's gaze. He hadn't laughed. He stood perfectly still, his hands in his pockets, studying the dynamic with the detachment of a judge. The clinking of silverware stopped. Even the ambient noise of the cicadas seemed to pause, waiting for my reaction. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. Beckett tilted his head, that faint smile shifting into something sharper. "Interesting," he said, his voice level, cutting through the humidity like a blade. Skyler blinked, expecting validation. "I know, right? It's sad, really." Beckett turned his body fully towards Skyler, his expression unreadable. "No, Skyler, what's interesting is that you think this is an appropriate way to speak." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "And it's interesting because you're fired." The smile froze on Skyler's face. It didn't fade. It just solidified, turning into a grotesque rictus of confusion. "What?" "You're fired," Beckett repeated, louder this time. "Effective immediately. Security has already cleared your desk." The yard went deathly still. A balloon popped somewhere in the distance, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. To understand the weight of that moment, the sheer, tectonic shift that occurred in the backyard of 422 Elm Street, you have to understand the architecture of my isolation. I was the leftover, the debris from a previous life. My mother, Linda, had been Dad's high school sweetheart, a woman of earth and flower and gentle hands. She died of breast cancer when I was 17. It was a fast, brutal thief that stole her by inches, then by miles. One day she was teaching me the secret to her cornbread times, cast iron Mariama, always cast iron times, and the next, the house was silent. Dad grieved for exactly 6 months. Then he found Tina. Tina was everything my mother wasn't: loud, materialistic, and ruthlessly ambitious. She came with Skyler, who was 11 at the time, a child modeled in her mother's image. 2 years later, they had Tate, cementing their new family unit. I became the ghost in the hallway, the reminder of a sad past they wanted to paint over. The inequality wasn't subtle, it was structural. Skyler got a red Mustang for her 16th birthday. I got a bus pass and a lecture about the value of public transit. Skyler got private tutors and ballet lessons. I got chores to build character. When Skyler needed Invisalign, checks were written without hesitation. When I needed braces, the family budget was suddenly tight. I learned early that asking for love was like asking for rain in a drought, futile and exhausting. So, I stopped asking. I became invisible. I worked nights at a diner, smelling of grease and old coffee, studying for my SATs in the flickering light of the break room. I got into the University of Oklahoma on a partial scholarship, but when Dad refused to co-sign a loan for housing because Skyler's private school tuition just went up, I made a choice. I dropped out, not because I was a failure, but because I refused to drown. I moved into a studio apartment above a laundromat in a rough part of OKC. The floor vibrated when the commercial washers hit the spin cycle. The air smelled of detergent and ozone. And there, on a second-hand laptop that overheated if I ran more than 2 programs at once, I began to build. I taught myself graphic design, then marketing strategy, then branding psychology. I didn't have connections, so I had to be undeniable. I worked under the name Brookline Energy Creative because it sounded corporate, faceless, and substantial. My first client was a roughneck drilling consultant who paid me in cash. I redesigned his safety manuals. Accidents dropped by 30%, he told his friends. For 5 years, I didn't sleep. I ate ramen noodles and drank instant coffee. I missed holidays I wasn't invited to anyway. I built a portfolio of work that transformed the visual identity of the midstream energy sector in Oklahoma. By the time I was 25, I had hired my first employee. By 28, I bought out a boutique agency in Denver. Now, at 30, Brookline Energy Creative was a $12 million a year powerhouse. We handled crisis management for oil giants, rebranded renewable startups, and managed media strategies for regional conglomerates. And nobody in my family knew. To them, I was Mariama the dropout, Mariama the waitress, Mariama the failure. I kept it that way. It was my armor. If they didn't know what I had, they couldn't take it. Until the USB drive. 2 weeks before the barbecue, I had driven to the old house in Edmond. Dad had called, saying he was finally clearing out the junk room, the guest room where he had shoved Mom's belongings 15 years ago. If I didn't come get them, they were going to the dump. The house looked the same, but it felt different. The porch light flickered with a nervous twitch. I stepped inside, the screen door groaning behind me. Tina was out shopping. Dad was at golf. The house was silent. I knelt in the corner of the guest room, surrounded by cardboard boxes labeled in Mom's neat, looping handwriting. Asterisk. Recipes. Winter clothes. Photo albums. Asterisk. The smell of lavender and dust hit me, a visceral punch of nostalgia that brought tears to my eyes. I was sorting through a box of old cookbooks when I saw it. It wasn't Mom's. It was a sleek, silver USB drive, modern and expensive, resting at the bottom of a box of knitting needles. It must have fallen out of a pocket or a bag. Recently, this room was used as a dumping ground for overflow clutter, despite being Mom's room. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. I pulled my laptop from my bag and plugged the drive in, sitting cross-legged on the dusty carpet. The folder structure was chaotic. Asterisk. Selfies. Party pics. Receipts. Asterisk. And then, a folder named Times Work. Portfolio asterisk. I clicked it. My breath hitched. My stomach dropped as if the floor had vanished beneath me. Files. Dozens of them. Asterisk Pipeline Safety Campaign. 2021. Renewable Transition Deck. The Energy for Tomorrow Spot. Asterisk. These weren't just similar to my work. They were times my work. I opened a video file. It was a 30-second commercial I had written, directed, and edited 3 years ago for a natural gas client in Tulsa. But the end card didn't say Times Brookline asterisk. It said Times produced by Skyler Brooks, OKC Channel 9 asterisk. I opened another. A print ad campaign I had designed for a wind farm. The tagline, the font, the color hex codes identical. But the metadata had been stripped. My hands shook. I scrolled faster. 5 years. For 5 years, Skyler had been accessing the Brookline server. But how? Then it hit me. Beckett. I had hired Beckett Lang 3 years ago to run the Oklahoma City branch of Brookline. We had acquired a smaller media production company, the parent company of the local station's creative department, as a subsidiary. Beckett reported to me, but I was a silent owner. I ran everything from the shadows, letting Beckett be the face of the operation in OKC, so I wouldn't have to deal with the local social scene. Skyler worked at the station. She was a junior producer. She must have found a way into the shared server, or perhaps she had guessed a password. I checked the file properties. The author field on the stolen documents had been clumsily rewritten to Times Skyler B***. She hadn't just stolen my work. She had built her entire career on it. The awards she bragged about at Christmas? Mine. The promotions Tina gloated about? Mine. The genius ideas Dad praised? Mine. I closed the laptop, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Mom's knitting needles sat in the box, silent witnesses to a new betrayal. The next morning, I went to see Isla. Ela Reed was my former roommate, a woman who could code in 3 languages and hack a government firewall before her morning coffee cooled. She lived in a loft above a tire shop in downtown OKC, a space that smelled of rubber and ozone. Ela opened the door wearing oversized sweatpants and a t-shirt that said Times I prefer my Java compiled asterisk. She took one look at my face and stepped aside. Coffee's on. Who are we destroying? We sat at her kitchen table, the laptop open between us. I slid the USB drive across the Formica. Tell me everything. Isla plugged it in. Her fingers flew across her mechanical keyboard, the clicking sound a rapid-fire staccato of vengeance. Okay. Looking at the metadata. File paths. Timestamps. She squinted. Mariama, this is sloppy. She's accessing the server using a legacy login. Remember that intern account you set up for the temp back in 2019? Guest, user, 1? I never deactivated it? Apparently not, and the password is still Times, password 123 asterisk. Isla shook her head. Amateur hour. But look at this. She turned the screen. She's not just downloading. She's re-uploading to the station's internal drive, changing the creation dates, and submitting them as original pitches. Isla pulled up a split screen. On the left, My original campaign from 2020. On the right, Skyler's submission to the station management dated 2 weeks later. She's been copy-pasting your entire career, Ela said softly. She's pickpocketing your brain. Does Beckett know? I asked. Ela dug deeper. No. His logs show he approves her pitches, but he doesn't check the source code. Why would he? He thinks she's a rising star. He has no idea the IP is coming from his own boss's archives. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. She thinks I'm a waitress, Ela. She thinks I'm nothing, so she steals from the company she thinks is just some random agency, not realizing she's stealing from Times Me asterisk. And not realizing that the station she works for is owned by a holding company. Ela trailed off, a wicked grin spreading across her face. Which is owned by Brookline. Which is owned by you. Exactly. Ela whistled low. Oh, this is going to be biblical. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Skyler. Asterisk family BBQ this weekend for Dad's B-Day. Bring dessert. Beckett is coming. I'm going to introduce him to everyone. Try to dress nice, okay? I stared at the screen. Asterisk. Dessert. Asterisk. She wanted me to bring sugar to a celebration of her stolen success. What are you going to do? Ela asked. I looked out the window at the OKC skyline, the heat shimmering off the asphalt. I'm going to bring dessert, I said. And the laptop. Which brings us back to the barbecue. The silence in the backyard was absolute. The wind had died, and the humidity felt like a physical weight pressing down on the guests. Skyler's face had gone from peach to a sickly shade of gray. Fired? You can't fire me. I'm the lead producer. My campaigns are. They're award-winning. Beckett pulled a folder from his blazer. He didn't look at her. He looked at Dad. Mr. Brooks, your daughter has been submitting plagiarized work for 5 years. She has violated every intellectual property clause in her contract. But worse than that, she has been stealing directly from the parent company. Dad sputtered, his face reddening. Now hold on, son. This is a misunderstanding. Skyler is creative. She works hard. Maybe she borrowed some inspiration, but… Inspiration? Beckett laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He opened the folder and tossed a stack of papers onto the picnic table, right next to the coleslaw. This isn't inspiration. This is theft. Forensic data logs. IP tracking. She didn't write a single word of those campaigns. Tina rushed forward, grabbing the papers. Who did then? Who is she supposed to have stolen from? Beckett turned slowly, pivoting on his heel until he was facing me. He dipped his head in a gesture of deference that sent a shockwave through the patio. She stole from the owner of Brookline Energy Creative, Beckett said. She stole from Mariama. Tina dropped the papers. They fluttered to the grass like wounded birds. Dad looked at me, his eyes wide, struggling to process the information. Mariama, you own the company? I stepped away from the fence. I walked into the center of the patio, my heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I founded Brookline 7 years ago, Dad, I said. While you were telling the neighbors I couldn't handle the pressure of college, I was building an agency. While Tina was packing peanut butter sandwiches for me and heart-shaped notes for Skyler, I was negotiating contracts with Chevron. I looked at Skyler. She was trembling, tears streaking her makeup. You called me a failure, I said to her. But every success you've had, every compliment you've fished for, came from my hard drive. You didn't just steal my work, Skyler. You tried to erase me with it. Skyler's voice cracked. I didn't know it was yours. I just found the server. I thought it was just some corporate database nobody used. You thought it was okay to steal as long as you didn't know the victim? I asked. That's your defense? Beckett stepped in. We're filing a suit for damages, Skyler. We're recouping the bonuses you were paid based on fraudulent performance. HR will send the paperwork. Skyler looked at Dad, pleading. Daddy, do something! But Marcus Brooks was frozen. He looked from his golden child, now tarnished, to the daughter he had discarded, who was now standing as a titan in his backyard. The cognitive dissonance was paralyzing him. Get out, I said quietly. Mariama, this is my house, Dad whispered, though his voice lacked any real conviction. I wasn't talking to you, I said. I looked at Skyler. Leave. Now. Before I decide to make this a criminal matter instead of a civil one. Skyler sobbed, a raw, ugly sound, and ran toward the house. Tina followed her, shooting a look of pure venom in my direction, but saying nothing. The party dissolved. Cousins mumbled excuses and hurried toward the gate. Neighbors suddenly remembered appointments they didn't have. Within 5 minutes, the backyard was empty, save for Dad, Tate, Beckett, and me. Tate, my 19-year-old half-sister, sat on a lawn chair, her phone in her hand. She hadn't moved the entire time. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "You built that?" she asked softly. "Brookline?" "Yeah," I said. "That's badass," she whispered. Dad slumped onto the bench. The Times Grill Sergeant Times apron looked ridiculous now. "Mariama, why didn't you tell us?" "Would you have believed me?" I asked. "Or would you have asked me to give Skyler a job?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. "Come on, Beckett," I said. "Let's go. This place smells like cheap wine." The fallout was slow and agonizing, like a structure fire that smolders in the walls before consuming the frame. The next evening, I was packing my apartment. I had already decided to move the headquarters to Denver permanently. There was nothing for me in Oklahoma anymore. There was a knock at the door. It was Dad. He looked 10 years older than he had the day before. His shirt was rumpled, and he held a thick envelope in his hand. He stepped inside without asking, pacing my small living room. "We need to fix this," he said, his voice hoarse. "Skyler is. She's destroyed, Mariama. She can't stop crying. Her career is over." "She ended it herself," I said, taping a box shut. "She's your sister," he shouted, the anger finally breaking through. "Family protects family." "Where was that protection when I was eating peanut butter out of a bag?" I asked, turning to face him. "Where was that protection when you cut me off? Or does family only apply to the ones Tina gave birth to?" Dad flinched. He placed the envelope on the coffee table. "There's $250,000 in there." I stared at it. "What?" "Inheritance," he said quickly. "From your mother's side. I invested it. It grew. Take it. It's yours. Just drop the lawsuit. Tell Beckett to reinstate her. Say it was a collaboration." I looked at the envelope. It was thick, heavy with the weight of hush money. "Mom didn't leave an inheritance, Dad. She died with medical debt that took 5 years to pay off." "I made some good trades," he lied, sweat beading on his forehead. "Just take it." The doorbell rang again. I checked the peephole camera. It was Tate. I buzzed her in. She walked past Dad, ignoring him completely, and handed me her iPad. "Tate, go home," Dad warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Shut up, Dad," Tate said. Her voice shook, but her hands were steady. "Mariama, look at this." On the screen were bank statements, charity ledgers. "I volunteer at the foundation," Tate said. Dad managed a local children's charity fund. I handled the data entry. I saw the withdrawal yesterday. $250,000, wired to a personal account. I looked from the iPad to the envelope on the table. "You stole from the charity?" I whispered. "To bribe me?" "It's a loan," Dad yelled. "I was going to put it back. I just needed to stop you from ruining your sister's life. You stole from sick kids to save Skyler from the consequences of her own actions," I corrected him. That is exactly who you are, isn't it?" Tate swiped the screen. "There's more. Last year, 75,000 went missing. The same week Skyler put a down payment on her condo. He's been funneling money to her for years." Dad lunged for the iPad. "Give me that." I stepped between them. "Touch her and I call the police right now." Dad froze. He looked at me, really looked at me, and saw a stranger. He saw a CEO who managed crisis situations for a living. He saw a woman who was no longer afraid of him. "You're going to destroy this family," he spat. "The family is already destroyed, Marcus," I said, using his first name for the first time. "I'm just clearing the rubble." I picked up the envelope and handed it back to him. "Take this. Put it back in the account before the audit hits. Because Tate is going to report this." "Tate, don't you dare," he snarled. Tate stood tall, channeling a strength I didn't know she had. "I already emailed the board, Dad. It's done." Dad turned pale. He looked at the envelope, then at us. He grabbed his coat and fled the apartment, the door slamming behind him with a finality that echoed in my bones. The unraveling was total. I moved to Denver 3 days later. My new office overlooked the Rockies, a view of jagged peaks and endless sky. The air was thin and clean. Back in Oklahoma, the storm raged. Skyler was blacklisted. Word travels fast in media, especially when the story involves IP theft from a major agency. Beckett made sure the industry knew exactly why she was fired. She lost her condo. The last I heard, she was working retail at a mall in Tulsa, living in a studio apartment not unlike the one I started in. I wondered if the irony kept her awake at night. Dad didn't escape. The charity audit was swift and brutal. Because he returned the $250,000 immediately, he avoided a long prison sentence, but the previous embezzlement for Skyler's condo nailed him. He took a plea deal, 3 years probation, restitution, and a lifetime ban from managing financial assets. The scandal cost him his reputation. His golf buddies stopped calling. He was a pariah in Edmond. And Tina? Tina did what Tina always did. She looked out for number one. She filed for divorce 6 months later, citing irreconcilable differences and financial deception. She took the house, sold the furniture, and moved to Arizona to live with her sister. Tate was the only one I kept in touch with. She transferred to Colorado State University the following semester. She comes to my office on Tuesdays for lunch. She's studying forensic accounting. We don't talk about Dad often. We talk about the future. One evening, about a year after the barbecue, I was working late. The office was quiet, the only light coming from the city grid below. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Skyler. Subject line, *, please. Mariama, I'm sorry, I really am. I have nothing. Please, can you just talk to Beckett? Can you give me a reference? Just something so I can get a job in marketing? I'm drowning here. We're sisters. I stared at the cursor blinking on the screen. I thought about the peanut butter sandwiches. I thought about the bus rides in the rain. I thought about the way she laughed when she called me a failure in front of everyone I knew. I thought about the work, my work, the late nights, the panic attacks, the sheer force of will it took to build something from nothing. She didn't want a sister. She wanted a lifeline. She wanted the safety net back. I moved the mouse. I didn't type a reply. I didn't offer a lecture or a forgiveness I didn't feel. I simply clicked *delete**. Then I closed the laptop, walked to the window, and watched the snow fall over Denver. It was quiet. It was cold. And for the first time in my life, I was entirely, wonderfully free.